Garcia, and welcome to episode 1 of the No Sabo Chronicles. Make sure if you like what you hear and you're enjoying this podcast, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for weekly videos. I have a very exciting chapter planned out for you guys. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, starting off, what is, No Sabo? What does that mean exactly? It's really translates to like I don't know, and it's kind of pulls from No Sabo Kids, which is a in simple, it's kind of an insult. But really it's I kind of played that to, my title. But really No Sabo Kids are kids that come from kind of Hispanic descent and they don't know Spanish. So that would be like me. So unfortunately for me, I don't speak Spanish. I did take Spanish. The 2 years that were required, in high school, and I occasionally dabble in some Duolingo. Um, but my Spanish is not the best at all, and I by no means would say that I even know it. I can understand it more than I can speak it, which honestly is a whole conversation within itself of a whole generation of kids who kind of grew up and what is there and there is a term for it, and I can't remember exactly what the term is, but it's kids who kind of grew up around people speaking a certain language, but they don't know it themselves, but they know enough to kind of know what people are saying, but they can't speak it. And I hear that a lot, especially where I work. I work at HEB. A lot of some of my coworkers, they can understand, but they can understand it, but they can't speak it, which obviously myself is included. Um, my parents only my mom speaks Spanish. She's very fluent in Spanish, and same thing with my partner as well. Both of them speak Spanish, but I was never taught Spanish. I grew up in Abilene. It wasn't until about maybe like 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, that I moved here to San Antonio. I've been here since the beginning of middle school, and obviously now I'm finishing up my college career, my college classes. And it's it's been one of the big things that I remember when I first moved here is really like the kind of the culture shock that it was for me. In Abilene, it's predominantly white people, and it was white, blonde hair, blue eyes kind of people, and there weren't a lot of kids that looked like me, and even then I still know I'm very light complected. But I would say there was probably a very small handful of kids that were of different ethnic backgrounds, that I would play on the playground with. And it wasn't until I moved here that I realized, oh my gosh, like, you know, I got to middle school and high school and everyone is Hispanic, and it was really nice and kind of relieving to be surrounded by people that look like me, or that could understand a little bit more of my own cultural background. But at the same time, I found it very difficult because I felt like there was kind of that disconnect, for me, because I didn't know Spanish. I barely knew a little bit about um, kind of Mexican culture within itself, and it's been within these last like maybe 5-6 years that I've started learning more about it. Like I said, my mom, she grew up learning speaking Spanish, and kind of embracing Mexican culture, but she never really taught my brother and I. And it wasn't again until we moved here that she kind of started teaching us. But it's one of those, like, I was kind of already grown, so being the little middle schooler that I was, I thought I knew better and I didn't need to learn it. But obviously, I take that back now. I wish I would have learned. But it's it's pretty hard. It's hard growing up and being, I'm an adult now. I'd consider myself an adult. It's hard being an adult and working in the workforce and working in a city that obviously embraces this kind of Mexican or this Hispanic culture, and not kind of even and not feeling as connected to it as you would like. And I try again. I do Duolingo, and I obviously I love Mexican food, and I love going to like the markets and going to like any events that I can, because I think it's so beautiful and I love learning about it. But you know, personally, I just find it very difficult, even now, to kind of just connect. Um, and back back in September, literally a day after my birthday, I had gone to a concert for this artist. His name is Christian Nodal. I love him. Again, he's a Spanish artist, and um, I remember he sang a song by Vicente Fernandez, and I really hope I'm not butchering his name. But he sang a song by him, and it was beautiful. It was He was singing, and everyone around me was singing and drinking beer, and there was a Mexican flag behind him. And I'm gonna be honest, I did start crying, and not because it was a beautiful performance, because it was absolutely beautiful. But I just felt so disconnected from what I was watching, and it was hard. It's like I know I love this music and I know I enjoy it. It's just hard because I can't understand it, and I know it's as simple like let me just go on my phone and translate everything so that way I know what the song is about. But there's so, especially within music, there's so many, it goes back so many generations, and now with we have groups like who are bringing back this bringing back an interest into kind of Latin music. Like, think we have like Peso Pluma or Grupo Frontera, and even Carol G. Like, we have all of these amazing artists who are kind of, bringing back this interest, and they're doing really good on like the Billboard charts. And I'm like so excited and so happy to see, people from my own culture that are doing, that are being successful. But they go on concerts and they go on tour, and then they obviously sing these songs that they grew up with, that everyone around me knows, and it's hard because I don't know it. And it's almost like, and I'm not saying that I hate the music, I don't. I love it. I love listening to it. Like, I can listen to it all day. It's hard again because I don't know it, and I think, like, whenever I get older, and if I ever have kids, or if I'm gonna be the cool tia, to my brother's kids, I want future kids to kind of know about these artists. Of course, like the ones now, but even like the ones that kind of set that, I don't want to say set the standard, but are kind of like the foundation for all of these artists now, if that makes any kind of sense. I remember when I used to live in Abilene, I listened to Selena. That was like, I listened to like Selena, Cumbia Kings, and like Lucky Joe. That was like all my mom had on, and that was really like the only kind of like Tejano music that I was ever introduced to. And fun fact, Selena's actually in my family tree. She's in the bloodline. So I'm related to Selena, which I always think is a pretty cool fact I have to share with people. But besides the point, I was really the only kind of Spanish music that I had, that I was surrounded by. And um, it was a little difficult sometimes because both my parents, they're both from Corpus, and even though like my mom and my dad, they grew up literally 10 minutes from each other, they're completely different in terms of like how they were raised and how they embrace their culture. My dad, he does like from ancestry, my dad comes more from Spain and my mom's more from Mexico, but even then, like my dad doesn't really talk about Mexican culture. Like, of course he still like embraces it, he knows he's Hispanic and everything, but my mom is really the one that's trying to teach my brother and I, and that always had kind of that influence on us, or the little bit of influence. And I know that like I would talk to my mom and I would ask her, like, why didn't you teach my brother and I Spanish? Why didn't you teach us this and this and this? And she would tell me it's just because of how people were in Abilene when she first moved there. Because my dad was military, so he was stationed in Abilene. And so my mom and my dad moved there. They were both pretty young when they got married. but she told me, when she first got there, people were racist. They were pretty racist against her and like her accent and how she looked and how she dressed. And so she kind of had to whitewash herself to be able to like blend in and kind of fit in as a community. And then obviously, as whenever she had me and my little brother, that she still had to kind of follow that. And I always think about how it would have been different if we were raised in Corpus or if we were raised here. Just because I always, it's always like, what if? What if I was born in San Antonio? Would I have known Spanish? Would I have been more connected with my cultural roots? That always be a big what if. But again, there's so many different tools now that can kind of help us learn more about our culture and learn different languages and different foods and even like different restaurants. Like San Antonio is so big and there's a restaurant for everything. So I love being able to go to different little like hole in the wall like mom and pop restaurants that have different types of like ethnic food, and just learning again. And I go with either my partner or my mom, and they'll kind of explain to me like, this is what this is, this is the story behind this, or my dad makes this, or my grandma used to make this. And I love hearing about it. It's so interesting. But it's being a No Sabo kid is it's really hard, and I don't know if there's anyone else that feels that way or feels that kind of disconnect. But if you do and you feel like anything that I've been explaining is relatable to you and you understand where I'm coming from, welcome to the show. Without a further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to the interview. I will see y'all next week. Hello, my name is Melena Garcia. Welcome to the No Sabo Chronicles. This is our first episode today, and we are here with special guest.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Barrera.
Natalie, go ahead. Go give us a little description about yourself.
So, obviously, I am a Hispanic. I was actually born in Brownsville, which is right at the tip of Texas, and it is a border town with Mexico. So, I am from a predominantly Hispanic area.
How would you say like your connection to Hispanic culture is, especially being like that far south? I know San Antonio, obviously a little bit north on the map, but like I'm from Abilene, and that's mainly like a lot of white people, and Brownsville is completely like 180. So like, how would you feel your connection to Hispanic culture is?
I think it's very strong. I actually am a first generation college student, first like American citizen on my dad's side, because my dad is from Mexico. So I was kind of always taught about the Hispanic culture growing up.
That's good.
Yes.
What challenges do Hispanic kids face when they're not exposed to their cultural heritage at home? So, I mean, now you live in San Antonio, you kind of get different kind of culture and how things were at Brownsville. So, how would you, from the 2 years that you've been here?
Mm-hmm.
2 years that you've been here, what do you think that you've noticed, or even like kids in Brownsville, if they were not raised in a very Hispanic household, how would you what challenges do you think that those kids kind of face?
I think it's definitely challenging to connect with other people like in the Hispanic community who have been raised with that upbringing, because it is different. I guess the family dynamic, which is a big part of at least my Hispanic upbringing, and then obviously like knowing Spanish and knowing some, I don't know, like little things, like just even knowing like how to cook, or like a recipe that has been passed down from generation to generation. And I know a lot of kids, at least I've found a lot of kids in college who are unable to cook, which is another big part of the Hispanic culture, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, do you feel like there are specific aspects of Hispanic culture that are crucial to children to experience to like kind of be like a well-rounded individual or something like that? Do you feel like there's anything that like these kids have to learn?
I think, and this is a really like broad, this is a very general statement, but from what I've experienced living, my first language was Spanish, and like growing up, I would stay with my grandma a lot, who only spoke Spanish and was from Mexico. I would say community. She knew all her neighbors. I knew all the neighbors' kids, and like when I would go to Mexico when I was younger, everybody knew everyone, and it was just it's a very welcoming culture to be a part of, just because we're always very, from what I've experienced, everyone's very welcoming and very, I don't want to say tolerant, but like it's a very welcoming culture to be a part of.
And you feel go ahead. I'm sorry.
I feel like that is a big part of like making a well-rounded person, someone who is able to connect with other people even if they don't know them, just things like that.
Yeah. And do you feel like us as a society or living in San Antonio, I guess you could say, do you feel like people are losing that trait, or do you feel like that's something that people are learning, or it's still kind of been the same?
I think it is still kind of the same. We do have a large Hispanic population here, but the Hispanic population here is somewhat gentrified. But it's different than an actual like a Mexican town,
right?
And like Mexican tradition, at least for me, like Mexican traditions.
Do you feel like the traditions that you grew up with in Brownsville are a lot more, I'm gonna say this like in quotes, like Mexican compared to like in San Antonio? Like I know, as far as I know, like Fiesta is like just San Antonio, you know? So it's like, do you feel like whenever you came up here, you felt like it was more westernized, like the traditions and everything like that?
Yes, there's a lot of westernization of the traditions and of the practices that I've seen up here, essentially. Fiesta is not a thing anywhere else, actually. So, experiencing my first Fiesta was very different, but it was a very cool experience. See that celebration of Hispanic culture.
Going to Fiesta or going to any events here in San Antonio, do you feel closer to your culture, or it's like a different side that you didn't know before? Is it something like you feel close to or that you can relate to back from Brownsville? Or
so we actually have a celebration of sorts, kind of like Fiesta. So when I first came, it was very comforting, like being a part of the whole Fiesta celebration, because it was like a little home away from home, I guess, moment. But it is different, but it's still it's very similar in like in feeling.
Right.
I don't know.
And do you feel like other southern cities, if they were to come up like to San Antonio or Austin or Houston, I'm gonna just say San Antonio. If they came up to San Antonio, do you feel like other people would kind of get that same feeling?
I think so. I think because there are certain things here that are able to remind me of home when I'm not.
Right.
When I'm feeling homesick.
Where I'm sorry. Where do you see the future of cultural awareness and acceptance for Hispanic individuals who haven't had a culturally embracing upbringing?
I mean, hopefully we become more accepting, but with certain you never know. I think definitely as a society, hopefully, we'll become at least more tolerant to like other cultures, even though it should be the whole melting pot thing.
Right.
would be more, ideally, would be more immersive and like everyone works together and everyone like knows other things about other cultures and celebrate other cultures as well as their own. But I think the more that people learn about the Hispanic culture and about like what it really means and the background, I guess, of it, the more people will understand and the more tolerant they'll be.
And do you feel like that's something that people just living in Texas should know? Is that like a nationwide thing people should know?
Well, I think it's like a worldwide thing.
A worldwide thing?
Should know, yeah. But I think as a globe, we all need to like fix it, because it's obviously the country's in disarray, the world is in disarray. Not to get political.
On the podcast. Now, what changes or improvements would you like to see in how society supports individuals exploring their cultural identity?
So I think actually the internet ridicules a lot of people based on how little that they know about their own culture, quote unquote. So like the whole No Sabo thing. I know.
I have to cut this out.
It's a meme. It's a meme, and it is. But like when you get down to it, it's like it's a joke that's like supposed to be offensive towards the kids who weren't able to learn or who were never taught Spanish. Which is not encouraging at all.
That's what the podcast is for.
I know. That's why I'm addressing it at the end of the podcast. But I think the people who know about the culture, who know Spanish, for example, who have obviously had this upbringing, like that's very cultural, very, very like filled with knowledge about the Hispanic culture. I think those people should be more welcoming to the other kinds of Hispanic people who aren't so fortunate to have learned it or to have been brought up with it. So I think it needs to be a partnership between the No Sabo kids and the other ones.
Do you feel like there is a partnership between like the No Sabo kids, and the other kids who do know? Do you feel like you're seeing more of like a kind of connect in relationships?
I think now, yes, but before it used to be more, them and us. There used to be a more separate thing. But I think more people are learning now that not everyone has the same opportunities.
Right.
But no, I think there is going to be a partnership that grows up, especially with these next coming generations.
Well, that is all that I have. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Do you have any last comments or anything for the fellow listeners?
Thank y'all for listening to this podcast. Melina should get an A.
Thank you. I will see y'all next week.